Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to be talking about the new archetypes that were released in Destiny 2 Renegades, whether we're talking about some of the ones that were introduced in the Equilibrium dungeon. We have some new dawning weapons. I don't think any of them are a new archetype. And then of course we have the Renegades weapons themselves from the DLC. So if you guys are curious, how good are these archetypes compared to the other archetypes, ignoring perks, ignoring, artifact mods, origin traits, all this stuff, just base performance. If we ever get new examples of these heat weapons and stuff like that, how good is the base performance, the base damage? Well, today I'm here to answer that question and also provide you with some context, because over the next week or so, I'm going to be releasing tier list updates for primaries, for specials, for power weapons, etc. And hopefully this will serve to provide you with some greater context. So when I talk about why an auto rifle might be S tier or A tier, that's a new Renegades weapon, then you have some more information to kind of base your decision off of and kind of base your judgment off of. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and introduce you to the tier system. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a spoiler here. If you're curious about my notes on analysis, like my summary on my thoughts on a lot of these weapons, it's going to be on the right side here. I rewrote all of these this season. And then we have a 5-tier system. So we have S tier, A tier, B tier, C tier, and of course, D tier at the bottom. And we have a little not applicable for Glaive Melee. That's just a kind of reference value there for you if you're curious how much DPS Glaive Melee does. Let's go ahead and get started. The way I'm going to do this tier list actually is I'm going to zoom out a little bit here and we're going to scroll over and I'm going to filter by specific weapon families. Okay, let's start with the auto rifle. So auto rifles, I've decided to place the support auto in the A tier. Support auto is like the harder the content gets, and also especially I would say in dungeons like contest dungeons, support auto can be really, really good because a lot of the time in day-to-day endgame content, we have builds that are so strong that the abilities can carry all of the ad clear, and you really just need something that can maybe give you a little bit of resto on a subclass that might not have it, especially maybe if your teammates are taking care of things for you and you're just there to kind of support them while they're handling mechanics and stuff like that. Support auto is really, really good. There's nothing that really can replace it directly, in my opinion. So support auto, especially specifically no hesitation, is insanely good in certain content. So because of its endgame defining role in that way, I think I have to give it an A tier. It's not an S tier because S tier would imply that it's applicable in basically all circumstances, which in endgame content it certainly isn't. But in speedrunning, it can be used to provide a damage boost to your teammates, 10% universally stackable, very good. And then of course it is role defining in certain content, like I mentioned. Outside of the damage boost, you of course have the survivability aspect, which can be used to heal both you and teammates. So pretty excellent stuff from the support auto. Next, we have a bunch of auto rifles in C tier. So this is going to include the auto rifle balanced archetype, which is a 450 RPM. 450 RPM matches the precision RPM. Now the precision frame auto rifle, the reason why I placed it in the D tier is because I said, as you can see here, worse range than high impact and somehow a worse damage profile too. Now the number to be looking at when it comes to primaries is going to be this add clear score summary kind of value here, okay? This column tells you how much combined minor and elite DPS, so red bar and chunky red bar like orange bars, how much DPS you're going to be doing to those targets in a typical scenario where you're reloading manually and perhaps you are not using like lunafactions or anything like that. You just have maybe like a loader mod and some reload boosts, from like flared magwell or something like that. This is what the add clear summary is supposed to represent. And this also values, as you can see here in the formula, it values elite DPS a little bit less than red bar DPS because typically you use primaries more in red bars. So with that in mind, right, this is kind of the ranking here. And as you can see, precision auto rifles kind of fall behind the rest of the pack by a fair amount, right? I would say like a fairly decent amount. And then, they don't carry the benefits of having higher range with high impacts or higher damage per shot. You have the heat effects from balanced autos, for example, which you can use to instantly proc stuff like heal clip. So yeah, that's the reason why I've ranked the autos the way that they are. I do think a lot of the auto rifles feel a little interchangeable. They're a little bit underrated, like the rapid fire, I think, and the balanced auto. Well, that just came out, but the rapid fire auto was a little underrated in the past. Its damage profile, for example, outcompetes certain SMG archetypes that people generally favor more in endgame content. But there's something else to be said about ease of use and the scope of autos compared to SMGs and how they feel at the typical combatant range that people take in endgame content. So yeah, that's it for auto rifles. Let's go ahead and move on. Talk about bows. Bows, the high impact bow. Yes, I've been experimenting with this thing and watching other people experiment with this thing. And I do genuinely believe over the next couple months or so, you will see Mobius Quiver crossbow come into the meta or become a strong contender in the meta, so much so that people may be willing to run Void Hunter in harder content, even though Void Hunter lacks the spam DR, spam ability access that Prismatic has, because Mobius Quiver with this bow is so potent. So I am of the opinion that, and in general, the crossbow is a little bit underrated, But yeah, I think it has, again, very high potential ceiling for damage rotations with refill perks like Envious. If Bungie were to make Envious with like a better damage perk like Aggregate Charge or something like that, you could see this bow see a lot more use. The reason why it wasn't that good in this past contest is because we have Envious high ground, right? And Envious really allows you to make use of this bow's full effect without using something like Speedloader Slacks, which opens up opportunities for you to use stuff like Fortune's Favor or, Nighthawk, or I guess Nighthawk can't be used with Mobius Quiver, but you know what I mean, right? Like other exotics that are potentially more impactful for damage. The 3 other bows, though, I'm not going to lie, I did compliment, non-denouement, for example, a precision bow, but that kind of stellar example of its archetype or a stellar example of its family is not enough to really elevate bows into being above the D tier, in my opinion. Bows for moment-to-moment gameplay, they are just too slow to activate things. They're too slow in their pacing, and they're maybe a little bit awkward to use at close range compared to something like an SMG or a sidearm. Yeah, they're just a little bit unwieldy when it comes to endgame content. A lot of the time, when people run primaries in endgame content, it is often to have something that has a high fire rate without running out of ammo that isn't a trace, right? Because like not everybody is like super comfortable with using a trace, even though I do think traces are a little underrated too. We'll talk about that when we get later into this tier list. But yeah, I think bows, they're just a little too awkward when it comes to mechanics, even dealing with enemies, when you're underpowered significantly. Bows are just a little bit more awkward, right? And certainly they're not used in even lower power content like speedrunning. So yeah, D tier, kind of have to leave them there, especially the high impact longbow, which suffers from these problems that I just discussed the most. Okay, so yeah, that's the bow. Let's go ahead and let's talk about the fusion rifle next. So fusion rifles recently got a bit of a rework. And so when I say rework, a bunch of different families were buffed by certain amounts. The rapid fire was left out by these buffs a little bit, but I know people still view the rapid fire as very high quality of life when it comes to just shooting a champ, for example, for chill clip, and you want it to freeze or you want it to stun as quickly as possible. Rapid fire is your guy. I guess not freeze anymore because they require 3 hits, but you know what I mean? Like rapid fires are just, because they have the fastest charge time, they feel like the highest quality of life, most responsive fusion archetype. But when it comes to actual damage now, they're not the clear class leader. So if we go ahead and look at 1 mag B DPS, which is your shot-to-shot DPS, generally what matters for legendary specials, you'll see here that aggressive frame fusion rifles actually are taking the lead now. And so high impact frame fusions are also pretty decent as well post buff. So I would say these 3 are the big notable ones. You can see B tier here is shared between all of them. And the thing that I like about Bungie's changes here is that I've always been of the opinion, and I think a lot of people agree with this, when I talked about the experimental archetype tier list, when I was like saying, here's the changes that I would suggest to make these archetypes more balanced. My opinion on archetypes is that it shouldn't be just like a raw range trade-off, because then you're strictly kind of balancing around PvP, because range generally isn't a noticeable issue in PvE. So really what it should be is a playstyle trade-off or a boss model trade-off. It should be situational to that degree, right? So for example, aggressive fusions, despite the fact that they have the highest DPS, some people will still gravitate towards rapid fire fusions in some cases because some boss models are simply too thin or maybe not close range enough for you to take advantage of an aggressive frame fusion. Like if you're damaging something like a wizard boss model, then an aggressive frame fusion is either going to miss bolts or you have to face tank completely, whereas a rapid fire fusion will have no trouble. High impact fusion. Now, high impact fusion has a lot more total damage. As you can see here in the boss total column, you're comparing something like 15.5, 16k to 23.5k. So that is actually a fairly substantial difference there. I would say like a rather, significant difference there, right? But then you're trading off a little bit of DPS. And then of course, you're also trading off quality of life because high impacts are famously very long charge time. However, I think that total damage is enough for me to say it's an outlier, say it's pretty underrated, and also place it in the B tier. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to my analysis on tiers, generally speaking, as an endgame player, in almost all cases, there's no reason for you to be touching anything in the B tier or lower if you are strictly looking at effectiveness, right? I think you guys know this, but strictly looking at effectiveness. So basically what I'm saying is these fusion changes are nice if you use fusions for some reason or you're forced to use fusions for some reason, but with Mint Retrograde in the game, with Sidearms and 4 in the game, which are both S tier archetypes that basically just, blast fusion rifles out of the water, none of these changes really matter in terms of what you're going to be taking with you generally into endgame content. But it's nice that these changes are being made. I still appreciate them. And certainly they make more fusions, an option in the sandbox when it comes to actually picking fusions. And then we have some of the other archetypes here. You have adaptives, which have a slight increase in total damage, but the DPS fall off is, I would say, rather drastic compared to something like a rapid or an aggressive. Not too bad, but I don't think there's a reason why you would take an adaptive versus a rapid if you were presented with both of them with basically, the exact same perks or something like that. And then you have the precision fusion, which still remains as the worst fusion rifle archetype in the game. Significant drop in shot-to-shot DPS. And then the total damage makeup is really not significant enough to warrant that, especially when you look at the fact that, for example, the high impact fusion has higher DPS than both the adaptive and precision, and absolutely dwarfs them when it comes to total damage. So that's my opinion on fusions. B tier and below, not really super, common stuff that you're going to see in endgame that you should really take in endgame, in my opinion, if you're playing for raw effectiveness. And then A and S tier. S tier, we're going to talk about that when we get there. But A tier is like largely stuff that is very good or best in class, but might be situational in some cases. Okay, so that's fusions. Let's go ahead and talk about glaives. So glaives, we can ignore glaive melee, just reference numbers there. But glaives, the problem I have with glaives sort of is that they all have the same shot count. Pretty much, right? You can see adaptive glaives have 33 shots-ish, aggressives have 34, and rapid fires have 33. That's kind of funny that aggressives have 34, given that they have the highest damage per shot of any glaive. So I don't know why they have the highest ammo count as well. This might be the specific glaives that I took when I was testing, but they appear to have one more shot than the other glaives. And then when it comes to damage, as you can see here, the total damage difference is quite stark, right? That's like a 50, 60-ish% difference in total damage between rapid fires and aggressives. And really, in my opinion, after the glaive quality of life buffs, before glaives, you could really feel the difference between an aggressive and a rapid fire because the stats were so poor on aggressive frames, right? But these days, after the glaive quality of life buffs, all glaives feel pretty snappy and responsive to use, generally speaking. So I don't know why you would want a rapid fire over something like an adaptive or an aggressive. Adaptives typically have decent shield duration compared to the other two archetypes. Aggressives have the best damage profile. And then you have rapid fires, which have a reload increase when your glaive is empty, which is like kind of useless in my opinion. So really, in my opinion, yeah, glaives, rapid fires. Unfortunately, Forthcoming Deviance is a great glaive, but if it was an aggressive, it would be even better, right? So Forthcoming Deviance, it is a rapid fire. I'm going to place rapid fires in the C tier, and then regular glaives when they are useful, which there are endgame cases where they can be useful, but you don't see people take them as much anymore into endgame content. I'm going to go ahead and place them in the B tier. They are situational, and I would say more situational than something like a support auto in terms of raw necessity, I would say, in endgame content. Okay, so that's glaives. Let's go ahead and move on and talk about breach grenade launchers or special grenade launchers. So number one, first we have area denials. Now area denials have fallen off a little bit because the meta is trending so strongly towards just ability ad clear, right? You have every single class in this game that is relevant, or I should say subclass setup in this game that is relevant for endgame content, besides like Solar Warlock, has consistent access to very potent splash ad clear. And so area denials for ad clear, they used to be pretty good, but they are a little slow, especially in low power content where your ticks are not really doing as much to the ads anymore. And, we've gone from a meta from like salvo to like waveframes to area denials. And now area denials are kind of just getting crept by the general game sandbox. So they're not going to be S tier. I think I maybe put them in S tier at some point. They're not going to be in S tier anymore. They're still versatile to some degree, right? You can apply splash effects with them, total damage with them, transcendence gains with them, even though I've heard that those were nerfed, but I'll have to measure them. But yeah, they're pretty decent, right? They're probably the most relevant general endgame outside of movement, let's say, endgame, like, special GL, but I'm not going to place them in the S tier. And maybe even me putting them in A tier compared to some of the other stuff that's in the A tier, they're definitely used less than a lot of the other stuff in the A tier, but it's borderline. I'm willing to put them there. Micro missile, basically just used for movement. GLs that are like impact based, so like, spike grenades, stuff like that, not really relevant for damage anymore when it comes to the special variety. So Gizmo Weft is cool, Shadow Gizmo Weft with bipod and stuff for movement, but not much else, right? You have waveframes, which are outclassed by area denials. You could argue that in speedrunning, there's some cases where a waveframe might still be useful for like killing ads like in a doorway or something like that, or like in a linear spawn pattern. And waveframes, their lethality is a little bit more instant, right? The damage comes out all at once, instantly kills an ad. Whereas, area denials, like I mentioned, they tick ads slowly. And in some encounters where, seconds really matter, that can be a difference maker. But really, I'm not going to give waveframes, the time of day when it comes to a general endgame ranking just because of that, right? And then we have double fires and lightweights, which are essentially completely irrelevant for endgame. Double fires are completely irrelevant compared to micro missiles. They just simply do less damage. And lightweights are arguably in an even worse situation outside of maybe for blinding. So yeah, largely relevant for endgame. Those are going in the D tier. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. No new archetypes here. Let's go ahead and move on to grenade launcher drum. So yeah, these are in the C tier. I honestly thought about maybe even putting them into the D tier because even solo and challenge players don't generally, look at heavy waveframes or adaptive or rapid spike GLs anymore. because, you know, you have heavy sniper now with sniper's meditation. Even rockets are generally preferred for like, you know, pre-sniper, like solo witness, stuff like that. So I'm not really sure where you'd use a GL now. Maybe, you know, besides Renix, you know, heavy waveframe might be decent there. But in terms of DPS, not that good compared to rockets, compared to like heavy sniper, even the new special sniper, which we're going to get to when we talk about snipers. And their total damage is worse than rockets, which themselves are worse than a bunch of other stuff on this list. So yeah, I mean, not great. Heavy GLs need something. I don't think they've really truly been in the end game meta for maybe, I don't know, like 2 DLCs now, and certainly nothing has happened this DLC to make that position any different. So what I will say though is compared to each other, they're quite similar. They're quite balanced, right? I'm pretty happy with the way that it's kind of worked out for them. If you look at their 1 mag boss DPS, which is basically shot to shot DPS, you have rapid fires leading the pack a little bit, and their total damage is going to suffer a little bit for it. I mean, they're technically a little bit better than adaptives, but not enough. It would be like rapids or C+, if that makes sense, right? But, you know, not that different from each other. And then you have compressed waves, which are essentially almost identical DPS to adaptives, which I think makes them a little bit underrated for like multi-body bosses, right? But outside of that, not much to talk about. So that's heavy GLs. Let's go ahead and move on to hand cannons. Okay, so hand cannons, to no one's surprise, I'm going to go ahead and put the dynamic 180 RPM hand cannon in the A tier. This is mostly because of its DPS with Lucky Pants. I would say once the meta has shifted and maybe Bungie nerfs this interaction with Lucky Pants. Okay, so to be honest, Bungie is probably going to nerf its DPS with Lucky Pants, but it will still probably be quite good. Like, it'll still be a class leader, and I'm probably not going to drop it for A tier. Otherwise, I would say this weapon is okay for ammo-sensitive neutral. It strikes a balance between a trace rifle's like granularity when it comes to dealing with enemies and not wasting a lot of ammo versus something like a rocket pulse. Rocket pulse, you have 14 shots. Trace rifle, you have like 400. This thing's got like 40 or something, right? And then you can, it's kind of a nice in-between, right? It's like a rocket sidearm that's a little bit more precise, I guess you can say. However, this does carry the same kind of disadvantages that rocket sidearms do, which is that if you're using them to shoot objectives, rocket sidearms, sometimes they can feel weird when it comes to like shooting buttons or shooting blights or whatever. And this certainly suffers from the same problem because of its insane crit multiplier, which, as a reminder, this thing's crit multiplier is 4 times, right? Which is insanely high. So if you may have noticed, if you try to shoot things like blights or objects with this dynamic 180 RPM hand cannon, because that is a necessitated body shot, you are not going to be able to break it very quickly, even compared to something like a regular primary or something like a more competent special. So there are people who have approached me and have said, you know, I like the dynamic 180 RPM special hand cannon because it's good for shooting objectives and it's decent for killing ads. And while I can kind of agree with that, it's not necessarily too different from a rocket sidearm in that regard, if that makes sense. So I don't know, they both have their advantages and disadvantages, but this ranking here is mostly for the Lucky Pants stuff. Mostly. Okay. So, and then in terms of the other hand cannon archetypes, nothing special here. We have Spreadshot hand cannon in B tier. Used to be in A tier, but I think there's like too much crowding in the A tier for a primary to exist there besides the support auto. So Spreadshot in the B tier. Also a little bit too niche, right? Statistically, it's a big outlier, but as you can see in my notes here, yeah, it's a little niche in its usage and people are still like a little bit uncomfy with using it. Like quality of life wise, it is still a bit of a clunky weapon and it is, I guess, inherently close range, right? So there's some encounters where you're not going to want to necessarily use a Spreadshot hand cannon. And then B tier, we have again the dynamic 180 RPM hand cannon, which is a new heat weapon from this season. As you can see here, the ad clear sum score is better than everything else besides the Spreadshot hand cannon. So yeah, this is pretty good, even accounting for the slower heat reload, pretty strong damage profile. And if you're willing to use the weapon, and I know a lot of people have said that they enjoy using this weapon, yeah, the math checks out. It's pretty strong, right? So compared to a typical 180 RPM hand cannon, you know, better reload ceiling on the precision, but you could argue that on reload effects trigger faster on heat weapons. So it's kind of a trade-off there. I think they're pretty similar. And then when it comes to the lower tier hand cannons, you have heavy burst and adaptives. Adaptives just have a strictly like significantly worse damage profile than something like a dynamic 180. Dynamic 180 also has like more granularity because of higher RPM. And then you have the heavy burst, which of course has a very punishing crit multiplier as well at 2.2 compared to the other hand cannon archetypes above it. And so this can be an annoying weapon to use when it comes to quality of life. And then finally in the D tier, I think like the 120 RPM hand cannon is like a little bit overhated for PvE because its actual ad clear sum score is not that different from like a 140, but I do think the 120 RPM really does hold it back. And the low base reload is like very noticeable, especially on certain weapons that have pretty bad base reload that are examples of this specific archetype. So that's it for hand cannons. No surprises here. You know, dynamic 180 RPM hand cannon, pretty good, pretty solid. Excited to see more of those come out. Okay, next up we have linear fusion rifle. Yeah, not a surprise either. This is if I had an E tier, linears would probably be in the E tier. These are just terrible. They have a precision requirement. They have a very high crit multiplier as well. So you kind of need a div or you need a boss that's pretty stable. And even on those bosses, you have heavy sniper, you have crossbow, you have exotic heavies, you have mint, you have all these things, right? Like there's just no reason to use even the base legendary snipers now are out damaging these things by a ton. So I don't know, linears need a lot of work for them to kind of be rehabilitated back into the meta. Just terrible, just terrible. Yeah, they're in the D tier. I don't think anyone's surprised. No changes really from last season. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to our probably first surprise of this video, and that's gonna be machine guns, right? So machine guns, yeah, I looked at their kind of data again, and really the only problem I have with machine guns besides the new one is going to be rapid fire machine guns, because rapid fire machine guns, they do, when it comes to add clear sum score, have a little bit of a substantial lead, I would say, over adaptives, aggressives, high impacts. But in my experience and in other people's experience, their fire rate is a little too fast and their recoil can be a little bit annoying to control. And machine guns, in my opinion, are best used ammo efficiency wise when you're kind of just tap firing and bursting down enemies. You're kind of being a little precise, and adaptives, aggressives, high impacts really feel like they're capable of doing that. Rapid fire is not so much. And then obviously you do lose a fair amount of total damage, right? You can see here like 8,000 total damage, and against the high impact it's more like 12,000 or 11,000. So I would say rapid fires, they deserve to be like a step down compared to the other tiers, but adaptive, aggressive, high impact, all fine, right? I think machine guns are some of the most balanced, one of the most balanced weapon archetype families in Destiny. And as you can see, like it's pretty clear why, right? Their total damage numbers, their add clear sum score numbers, they're pretty similar, and they feel like they have good trade-offs. Now, let's address the red elephant in the room, which is going to be the balanced 900 RPM machine gun. Now, this might be a mistake on Bungie's part, because for some reason, despite the fact that, obviously machine guns seem like they would be a good and compatible choice to be adopted by the heat system, they gave this thing 432 ammo. 432 ammo. And let me just remind you, this is a 900 RPM, so it's kind of modeled after, I suppose, the rapid fire. And it does less damage per shot than a rapid fire machine gun. It does less damage per shot. It doesn't get the damage boost to powerful combatants that other heat weapons do. I don't know why. This is the only heat power weapon I think that we have. And it doesn't say increases damage against powerful combatants like the other heat weapons do. So maybe this is a balancing decision from Bungie's, and they're saying like heat weapons that are heavy specifically are not going to get the damage boost to powerful enemies. Maybe was their reasoning, but for some reason you don't get that damage boost, and the base damage is lower. And when you compare like for like 900 RPM to 900 RPM, you see 432 ammo versus 582. That is 150 less ammo, and that's reflected directly when we come to total damage to red bars. You can see here 44k, and then you had this nice grouping here. You had 62k, 69k, 70k, 83k, 44k. So significantly worse total than other LMGs. And I do say for no real gain. I mean, I guess so. I mean, technically, like the heat system does allow you to have that stepped reload, which can be kind of nice, especially on a long reload weapon like a machine gun. But realistically, like, are you willing to cut your reserves by that much on a weapon that basically prides itself on being a minor red bar total damage monster? Like, not really, right? So I kind of have to put it in the D tier. Maybe this was a mistake from Bungie. I don't know. I really feel like they meant to give it more ammo than this, because it's a 900 RPM that does less damage than a normal 900 RPM and then has this much less ammo. So yeah, I don't know what's going on there. But yeah, that's machine guns. Let's go ahead and move on. And also machine guns generally, I should say, as a family, the reason why they're in B tier is because machine guns, I don't know, their time in the sun, while they are more useful, I can see them being used more often than something like a linear or a heavy GL. The time for machine guns has definitely kind of been eclipsed these days. I mean, people are running eager edge swords during damage encounters. People are running exotic heavies during damage encounters. So machine guns, even for like your div user, like, I don't know, these days, maybe not as relevant, pretty niche. Okay, so that's machine guns. Let's go ahead and move on to pulse rifles. Pulse rifles, what'd you expect? You can see your micro missiles, S tier, still excellent and easy super generating damage, even post nerf, right? So the big thing with micro missiles is, of course, they're excellent for ad clear. They have good ammo efficiency, even post nerf. Their boss total damage is passable, totally fine for pretty much almost all day one circumstances, right? Their brick efficiency is good, and they're just super easy to use, right? You can miss crits. This thing's effective crit multi is like 1.2. That's like totally fine, right? I think it's even lower if you account for like the splash component as well. It's like 1.1 or something. It's in my other spreadsheet somewhere, but regardless, This thing's crit multi is famously low, does crazy amounts of damage. Like even after its nerf, it's still totally fine. And it's still the only thing that I put into the S tier, because really this thing is the only weapon, legendary weapon, that really you can take into literally any activity and it's still good. It's still good. Now these days you do have to craft a little bit more into, like, you know, making sure that you have ammo and that you're, you know, upkeeping your ammo system, but really it's not that big of a deal. And with the ease of use that this thing provides, this thing is like the final nail in the coffin when it comes to, you know, dismissing other primaries, dismissing even other special weapons like rocket sidearms and stuff like that. Like this thing really is just the be all end all. It is just so easy to use. It has splash damage for days. It has great perk synergy, great damage to bosses, great damage to red bars, great ammo economy, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on. So really, I have to leave this thing in the S tier. It's dominated another contest race again. So I can't really give it marks against it. So yeah, that's S tier. Let's talk about the primary pulses. Yeah, a little bit more boring. Generally speaking, my opinion on pulse rifles has shifted downward a little bit. I do think pulse rifles, when it comes to the typical engagement range for Destiny 2 gameplay, for endgame gameplay especially, they're a little awkward, you know, at some of those closer ranges, and they're a little bit unwieldy to get crits with at some of those closer ranges compared to something like a sidearm or compared to something like an SMG. And while their damage profiles are not terrible, they're kind of competing at the same ranges. Like the pulse rifle, in theory, the effect would be, oh, you have longer range, so there's like a trade-off there, right? But like the engagement ranges that you typically play at, you are not really running into range issues with like SMGs or sidearms for the most part. And if there's longer range enemies, you just shoot them with mint. So I don't know, pulse rifles, they're fine. I just maybe even wouldn't put them in B tier. There's a bunch of them that are interchangeable. Pulse rifles are also pretty balanced, I would say, right? You have heavy bursts, rapids, adaptives, lightweights, aggressive bursts. You can see their ad clear score is like, yeah, I mean, the bottom to the top, it's like a little bit of a difference, but I'm not going to put any of them in like D tier. And then the new pulses, I mean, the balanced and dynamic archetype, they slot in right in this group, right? They're pretty much all in the same grouping. So, I mean, you can argue that the heat system can provide some more perk synergy, but besides that, like, they're pretty chill, right? They're kind of just in the C tier, right? They're chilling with the rest of their pulse friends. The only pulse that I'm going to point out as being, you know, specifically bad is the high impact frame pulse. I've talked about this in previous seasons. It's the lowest quality of life pulse archetype, and it has the worst damage profile to boot. I mean, 648 ad clear sum score compared to the neighbor, which is like almost 680. That's a pretty big gap compared to the gap between all of these, right? So yeah, that's pretty much it for pulse rifles. I mean, my feelings on them, I think a lot of my tier listing going forward will be structured kind of more toward end game / day one focus, where the feel of a weapon really matters, the snappiness, the responsiveness of a weapon, how awkward and its quality of life in kind of high intensity combat situations is going to factor in more. And yeah, pulse rifles, you know, they don't really have that kind of feeling to them, I suppose. Okay, so yeah, that's pulse rifles. Let's go ahead and keep going on, and we're going to move on to rocket launchers. So rocket launchers, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, right? Precision's worst in the game, right? They have tracking, but their damage profile is abysmal compared to the others. High impact, they have actually the highest total damage of all the archetypes, and they don't sacrifice as much damage compared to the precision. So I put them in the C tier. But I think it's like, you know, a little bit underrated, perhaps, right? For maybe rocket phases where, you know, they're a little longer and you care a little bit more about total damage. But I think those cases are kind of few and far in between. So, you know, place them a tier lower. And then adaptives and aggressives are effectively identical for most cases. Aggressives technically have like a slightly higher fire rate and worse stats, but doesn't really matter too much, not enough to move them up or down a tier. I think rockets are really just relegated to speedrunning now for the most part. So yeah, if you like speedrunning and you like rockets, I mean, yeah, but I mean, I don't know. People are just doing lucky pants and speedrunning right now too. So to be serious, it's not much of a use for rockets. Yeah, a lot of legendary heavies are, as you can see, not doing too well right now. But yeah, I mean, they could be useful for some sort of burst phase in the future. Rockets are always popular for that sort of thing. But we haven't had a lot of those recently. And yeah, not much use for them right now. Okay, let's keep going. No new rockets this season, so not too much to talk about there. Let's go scout rifles. Okay, so scout rifles, yeah, to nobody's surprise, scout rifles are generally one of the more downtrodden archetype families in Destiny 2 when it comes to endgame analysis. And yeah, this season is no exception. Aggressive scouts, awful quality of life. Precision and high impacts generally just feel very terrible because of their horrible stats, and their damage profile certainly is not great either. Lightweights, I gave them a little bit of benefit here because they have some quality of life benefits, and like that quality of life can definitely kick in when you are comparing them for shoot to loot use cases, withering gaze use cases, explosive payload use cases, which do come up. They do come up. That is kind of how scout rifles are used in endgame content right now, either for shoot to loot explosive or for withering gaze. And so for those cases, I would certainly, there would be a noticeable difference between me using a lightweight or a high impact for that. So I did give them a step up, even though their add clear score sum is pretty similar. That score sum doesn't tend to matter in that content, right? And then rapid fire scouts, they are a step above the traditional scouts, so I gave them again C tier. And then you have the new balanced scout, which is a 260 RPM, which matches the RPM of the current rapid fires, except the add clear score sum for this specific new archetype is going to be higher strictly because of the heat bonus, right? You can see the elite DPS goes from 319 to 374. And so, yeah. And also the heat scout does have a noticeably larger mag. The 20 mag Fang of Your Ute here versus the 28 mag on the Voltaic Shade. So as you can see, that definitely also factored into my ranking. Not enough for me to bump this to B tier, with a lot of the other B tier weapons being a lot more relevant than I would say literally any scout rifle. But decent, and definitely the best scout archetype in the game. So that's something, I suppose. Let's go ahead and move on from scout rifles and talk about shotguns. So shotguns are a little interesting. Some of these also got some buffs and changes and stuff like that. So this is accounting for all of those things re-ranked. In my opinion, the three best shotgun archetypes, which again, kind of like fusions, these changes don't matter too much because shotguns are not really used for anything besides 1-2 punching right now. But you know, let's entertain this discussion regardless. If we were in a world where shotguns are good for damage, you have aggressives, heavy bursts, and rapids. I think aggressives are a little underrated because of their per shot damage, and given that you can reload cancel, which bypasses typical requirements, I guess, of a shotgun where you need something like Grave Robber or Envious to reload your shotgun. Aggressives don't really care, right? You can just reload them and shoot, and you don't really lose any damage, especially with stuff like Trench Barrel. So I do like aggressives for that reason, and that's kind of why they're this high up. Heavy bursts, they have total damage, and I would say, like I wrote in my notes here, they are the most realistic option for content where you would use a shotgun for damage. So, for example, people did solo Master Nez with like, Envious Bait on Pure Recollection, but that's just an example, right? That's like, oh, we need a legendary option that, surge matches or like does good damage, and people settled on the shotgun because they realized it's appropriate, right? And so that's an example of like hard content where this might be used. But in my opinion, if there is content where you would use a shotgun, probably the heavy burst is what you would pull out, is what I'm saying. Is the most realistic choice. It has a good total damage, fairly like decent pacing, easy to keep up, has 4 times the charm access as well to increase its total damage even further. Just seems like a good pick, right? Pretty much. And then you have rapid fire shotguns, which are the highest shot count shotgun that is compatible with 1-2 punch. And so that factors in. And also people have used this with like Song of Flame and like Trench Barrel before, for just like easy DPS that is high compared to the other archetypes here. As you can see, 1189 1 mag, 698 Luna BDPS, pretty high, right? So these are the 3 maybe potentially relevant shotguns in endgame content. Then you have the rest. You have lightweights, which, as I've said before, have total damage issues, which they still have. They are the lowest total damage shotgun of all the archetypes, tied with precisions. And they do have the quality of life increase of, handling and the lightweight bonus and stuff like that. But the rest of their damage profile is really nothing to speak of. So not going to talk too much about that. Slugs, I think, are outclassed by heavy burst in the current moment. And then rapid fire slugs are outclassed by heavy burst as well. I mean, rapid fire slugs, after their change to the assault mag, which was bugged, you can see here that it's just kind of embarrassing, right? 1 mag BDPS is lower than heavy burst, and the total damage is also lower than heavy burst. So just a strict downgrade, pretty much. And then finally, we have precision shotguns, which were recently changed. They now do the exact same damage per shot as a lightweight shotgun, and that damage is not very good, and they have a lower fire rate, which means their DPS is even lower than lightweights. So, like I said here, same shot damage and reserves as lightweights, but worse in every other way. So that is my analysis on shotguns. No new shotgun archetypes this season, and this analysis has changed a little bit, I think, from prior seasons. I think I am favoring heavy burst a little bit more, but like I said, in most content, you're not going to be using a legendary shotgun for damage if you care about effectiveness in endgame content. Let's go ahead and talk about sidearms next. Now, sidearms I actually do have a soft spot for in endgame content. I think they're a little bit underrated, but let's talk about them. So first in the A tier, we have rocket sidearms. I do think rocket sidearms, in terms of like killing a single ad and then getting a reload, I'm talking heal clip here. They are obviously, I mean, a lot of people use heal clip return memory in recent contest content, and you can tell why rocket sidearms are so useful, even in an era dominated by rocket pulses, right? So for that, I have to give them A tier, as you can see here, outshined by micro missile pulse in a lot of content, but still a pretty decent and a more ammo sensitive option. When people are saying they appreciate the finer granularity that's brought to them by using something like the special blaster, the micro missile sidearm also provides that while it's still doing splash damage, and arguably, at least for now, having better access to perks that synergize and are more important in game content, right? So that's it for the A tier. B tier, you have a bunch of interchangeable sidearms. You have adaptive burst, you have adaptive, you have rapid fire, heavy burst, lightweight, blah, blah, blah. All of these have pretty similar ad clear scores. I mean, adaptive burst is pretty high, but these will all generally feel the same outside of maybe burst sidearms taking a bit to get used to. Once you get used to them, I think a lot of people have been telling me they love the evening SI4 with heel clip-in and incandescent this season as a replacement for something like a Drang or a heliocentric. So I think people are willing to get used to it, and you'll get rewarded for it, right? The ad clear sum score is higher, so the damage profile is better. And then surprisingly, the dynamic 360 RPM sidearm is fine, right? I didn't want to put it down in the C tier with precision sidearms because I do think precision sidearms just generally actually feel worse than the other sidearm archetypes, which is definitely not what you want on like a close range snappy primary. But at least the dynamic sidearm has access to the heat system, which allows it to activate, on reload perks a little bit faster. So I'm willing to give it a little bit of that benefit over precisions. I would also say anecdotally, and from what other people have told me, the sidearm certainly feels better than like a standard precision. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and place it in the B tier, kind of splitting hairs a little bit here, but I think it's a fair assessment. That's it for sidearms. I think generally a little underrated, but still a legendary primary in, in the current meta. Okay, moving on, let's go ahead and talk about SMGs. Okay, SMGs. We have 2 new SMG archetypes actually, and only one of them is going to be in the B tier. Right, which might be surprising to you, and that is the aggressive burst. Now, obviously, my opinion on this has turned around kind of significantly since I first experimented with this SMG, because this SMG, I tested it on a boss for base damage values when I was doing the creator preview at Bungie, and I told you guys, this thing fires at the same RPM as a 600 RPM SMG, which is the worst SMG in the game, and it does lower damage or like similar damage, so don't expect anything great from this. However, when we looked at the minor scalars, as you can see here, SMGs, generally speaking, all share the same minor and elite scalars, 1.43 and 1.33. This SMG is not the case, 1.58 and 1.47, and that is enough to actually step its ad clear sum score significantly over every other SMG archetype in the game. 755 compared to, 590 to 650. So with that in mind, this SMG is technically the best ad clear SMG archetype in the game, has a very, very big mag size, base reload hurts a little bit, but you can definitely, manage. And, certainly it came out of the gates with some decent perks. The only problem I have with this is obviously because the mag is so big, your synergy with stuff like attrition orbs is not going to be as great because that's a mag percentage based perk. And the RPM is obviously lower than something like a lightweight SMG at 900. So attrition kinetic is something I still value more on multi-mach than this weapon. But if we're just looking at raw archetype value, technically this is a better archetype than the others. And I would say it's like pretty substantial, right? The gap is like 100. It's like 100 add sum, score. And I thought that might be enough to like kind of drag it over the edge here between B and C tier. You can argue maybe lightweight because of like attrition orbs and how much that is tied to SMG performance. That also deserves to be in B tier. But you guys have my opinions. I'm literally doing this video for that reason, to tell you my opinions. So that's kind of the nuance behind that. And then the new balanced 900 RPM SMG archetype is pretty much the same as like a lightweight SMG in terms of damage profile, except you can see here that the boss DPS is significantly higher than all the others. And so I said, yeah, best in slot for PKs, but worse than best SMG archetypes otherwise, which I think is a fair assessment because it is in fact the best boss damage archetype. And I'll probably add it to the spreadsheet at some point because some people were interested in that. So yeah, we'll give that a shout. We'll give that a shot. And it's the best for boss damage. In terms of the other SMGs, like I said, precision SMGs are the worst in the game. They feel the worst. They are the worst. Their damage profile is the worst. So they were given the D tier. Everything else here is like kind of similar in the C tier. Honestly, like maybe we could put balanced and lightweights in the B tier because like, I don't know. I guess adaptives are also 900 RPM, so they share the same benefit for like attrition orbs and stuff like that. I don't know. You can kind of take it or leave it. Maybe aggressives deserve to be in C tier by themselves. I don't know. I'm not going to lose too much sleep over it. They're pretty similar. All right, they're pretty similar. Okay, let's move on from SMGs and let's move to snipers. All right, we're almost done. So sniper rifles, there's 5 archetypes. One of them is a heavy. The first one, as you can see here, boss total, 37.8k, pretty impressive. Luna boss DPS, 692, pretty impressive, pretty good. Per brick is like class leading, very, very good. And so yeah, basically my summary here is it matches the context of where you would use a linear, a precision boss, or like a div, but actually good damage profile. This is what linears aspire to be. And so unfortunately, the existence of this weapon in this game makes me question whether or not Bungie is ever going to address the linear problem in the room. We have a Mistral lifts and people are like, oh yeah, I got a Mistral lift from Dawning, but like, are they ever going to use that? Is there even going to be a time for them to use it? By the time we actually get linears to being relevant again, and if they are ever relevant again, there's probably going to be new linears. So yeah, I don't know. People who are farming for Mistral Lift right now, I mean, you know, more power to you, but this is the society we live in right now. And then, yeah, and then a big standout, probably the biggest standout in terms of performance from this new DLC is the dynamic 140 RPM sniper. This thing does higher 1 mag base DPS than the heavy sniper. So the heavy sniper, back when it was being able to, you know, you were able to just hip fire it into the div bubble over and over and over, shooting it at max rate, 72 RPM. This thing does a higher DPS than that, right? This thing does higher DPS than that when you're just shooting shot to shot. The Luna base DPS is obviously going to be lower, or the Luna boss DPS is going to be lower because of the, you know, the heat reload. But yeah, total damage wise, this thing is more total than Mint. And because it's a precision weapon, Bungie is probably going to be willing to give it triple tap or 4th times in the future or something like that. And it doesn't need Darcy. It doesn't need Darcy to beat Mint. It just does that much damage. So potentially interesting. The only downside here is obviously it is a crit weapon. And being a crit weapon means that it's going to lose to Mint in most cases, because Mint is just super, super easy to use and does almost all of its damage, regardless of whether you hit a crit or not. And so, yeah, that difference is probably going to be enough to, you know, make me leave the dynamic sniper out of the S tier, because it's just by nature a little bit more restrictive in terms of like when you can use it. But yeah, very interesting damage option with high total and a perk ceiling. So excited to see people cook with this thing. I'm certainly going to be trying in the future. And yeah, that's pretty much it for that. In terms of the other sniper archetypes, no surprises here, right? Rapid fires are better than adaptives and aggressives, similar total to other non-heat snipers. So typically you'll see rapid fires, like for example, rapid fire shotgun has lower total than some of these slower firing archetypes in exchange for having higher DPS. This is not the case with snipers. With snipers, rapid fires have basically the same total as adaptives and aggressives. The only difference is rapid fires actually have better compatibility than for 4 times a charm, which leads to them effectively having more total than an aggressive. You don't see aggressives with 4 times a charm because their mag is so small. And so yeah, B tier, Praetus Revenge, stuff like that. And then C tier for the other two. No real benefit for using these. I guess like, succession with like recombination can be useful in some cases for some things, but for the most part, not really. Finally, we have 2 more tier lists to go through. We have sword and we have trace rifle. So swords, I'm a big sword guy. The reason why I say that is because a lot of people have come to me asking about sword archetypes because it's kind of not super well discussed maybe in the community. So let me just give you my opinion on swords. So swords, I think casters and waves are the best right now. Casters have chunking when used in fire teams. Their heavy attacks just have a little bit of chunking to them. And they have excellent tick-based synergy, which is going to be relevant in the future when it comes to attrition orbs, when it comes to proccing the 2-piece set bonus for the Sage Protector set from the dungeon. So with that in mind, B tier is totally a fair assessment, I think. And then swords, wave, after the fire team wave stacking fix, they're the best overall archetype. They're pretty straightforward to use, right? Synancia compared to something like an adaptive, you don't have piercing issues. The tracking is pretty aggressive. It's like fairly straightforward to use on bosses. And yeah, so B tier I think is fair. And then you have adaptive, aggressive, and lightweight in the C tier. These are all basically just alternatives to casters and waves. They're, I would say, strictly worse for the most part. People have been asking me if Salt and Claw is going to be good for damage because it has double damage perks. No. If you look at the DPS here, you have this, which doesn't account for chunking, by the way. And obviously there's the tick synergy that I mentioned. You have 1172 here. You have adaptives that are worse, and then aggressives and lightweights are even worse than that, right? So yeah, not the greatest. And then finally, we have Vortex swords, which are Bungie, please buff Vortex swords or undo the nerfs to Vortex swords. They eat the most damage on their heavy attack and they still have the shittiest damage profile. I mean, look at the total damage difference between Vortexes and the rest of the squad. 22.7k and you have lightweights at 41k. You have waves at 36.5k. Like everything here is at least 30k and you have Vortexes sitting here at like 22.7k. Like that is a bit ridiculous. So please buff Vortexes. They, I guarantee you can buff Vortexes by like a rather substantial amount and people probably still won't use them. So yeah, that's Vortexes. Or I guess maybe, I don't know, people probably still do use them because they remember, falling guillotine being good for damage, but regardless, I digress. That's my little rant on swords. Okay, and finally, we have trace rifles. Trace rifles, there's only one archetype. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and put in the B tier next to the other high tier primaries like certain sidearms and stuff. I think trace rifles are actually not too bad. They're useful for shooting objectives, and I know people say that like trace rifles heal enemies in endgame content, or they're like they don't do enough damage in endgame content, so they'd rather run a rocket sidearm or a rocket pulse or something like that. But if you're a mechs player and you like shooting mechanics, and you like keeping your ammo and being ammo efficient, I think trace rifles are not bad. They are honestly, okay, let me like show you some context here. So if we filter by add clear sum score and we scroll down, where are trace rifles? Oh yeah, so trace rifles are actually basically the same as a top tier primary, right? They're a little bit obviously below micro missile sidearm and stuff like that, but that's to be expected, right? So where are they? They're like near heavy burst hand cannons. They're near 180 RPM dynamic hand cannons. They're near adaptive burst sidearms. They're near they're basically top of the pack primary, right? Which I think is fine because trace rifles are way more forgiving. They have way bigger mags. They have a much lower crit ratio compared to the vast majority of primaries. They're very, very forgiving to use. And a lot of them have pretty solid perks now. We have like 900 traces now, all of which at some point got some decent perks. So yeah, trace rifles, don't hate on them too much. I mean, I still think their use cases are a little limited when it comes to overall endgame content. You can use them for some things, but that's what the B tier is for, right? B tier is like for kind of niche stuff where you might pull them out if you really need a primary or something like that. You need something like a heel clip sidearm that's specifically a primary for day one. That makes sense to be in the B tier. A tier is really stuff that I think is pretty good in all of the game or very, very good in a specific part of the game. And then S tier is just good in every part of the game, right? So if we go back to our tier list here and we go ahead and sort by actual tier, and then I'm going to go ahead and move micro missile up because S comes after A, B, C, and D in the alphabet. So let me fix that. And yeah, so this is what the tier list looks like. I hope you guys understand what's going on here. The only primary in the A tier I do think really is the support auto. It's kind of had its doubters, had its haters, and I think it's kind of proven over time that it just can't be replaced in certain activities, certain aspects, right? Like people use Navigator, I suppose, but that's an exotic. But yeah, it can't really be replaced in certain aspects, in certain content. Number one, for its damage boost. And number two, for that healing aspect of being able to use your teammates as a battery, regardless of what class you're on, how universal it is, as well as being able to support vulnerable teammates. It's just very good for that. And then you have a bunch of stuff in the B tier, which I think is potentially usable in some content some of the time. You have C tier stuff, which is generally like alternatives or like, down on their luck archetypes that don't really see any relevance, right? They're like alternatives to the alternatives to the niche stuff. And then D tier is just like kind of radioactive stuff. Like really, I have no idea why you would ever use this in endgame content. Okay, so that's it for the tier list. I hope you guys enjoyed my analysis of some of these new archetypes like the heavy sniper, the new dynamic sniper, which we'll be talking about more of when we get to the sniper tier list. And I hope that this provides you with some interesting context to kind of discuss some of the upcoming tier lists that we're going to talk about, like the auto rifle tier list, bow tier list, etc. And yeah, that's pretty much it. You guys have a wonderful day, and I hope you enjoyed.